Hey story lover. Welcome to the channel. Before moving forward, please subscribe our channel. And if you like the story, please tell us in the comments. Your thoughts are a precious gift for us. Let's dive in.
Blood was still floating in the air when the emergency seals snapped shut. Tiny crimson globes shimmered in zero gravity, drifting past broken bits of glass and twisted metal. A child's toy, half melted, bumped into Captain Laura Keene's shoulder as she pulled herself through the wreckage of Vera Station's transit hub. She shoved it away, her jaw locked tight. Every corridor she passed reeked of scorched plastic and burned flesh. The screams had stopped minutes ago. That was worse than the screaming. Her comm crackled. "Captain, med teams can't get through. Too much debris. We need orders." Laura steadied herself against a warped beam and forced her breathing under control. Her ribs hurt where the blast had thrown her, but she ignored it. Orders. She was supposed to have them. Yet what could she tell them? To patch wounds with their bare hands? To comfort mothers who were clutching bodies they could not save? She floated into the main atrium and stopped. Half the dome had been torn open by plasma fire. Hundreds of civilians had been caught in the blast, their bodies sucked into the void. The other half were trapped, clinging to railings, crying into the recycled air. They looked at her like she was supposed to fix it, like she could. Behind her, Lieutenant Aaron Pike emerged from a hatch, his face smeared with soot. He coughed hard before speaking. "Transit hub's gone, Captain. We lost. Hell, I don't even know how many. Dock 3's still intact, but barely. We can pull maybe 2 ships through before it collapses." His voice cracked on the last words. He tried to cover it by spitting blackened phlegm onto the wall, but did not hide the tremor in his eyes. Laura forced herself to answer. "Get everyone to Dock 3. Children first. Children first." Pike shook his head sharply. "Captain, you've seen the numbers. We don't have enough space for everyone. You're telling me we pick who gets left behind?" She wanted to tell him no, that every soul would make it out. But the station's bones were groaning, metal plates screeching under strain. The truth was written in every collapsing corridor. "Children first," she repeated, softer this time. Pike swore under his breath. He punched the bulkhead, leaving blood on his knuckles, then shoved himself back toward the hatch without another word. Laura stayed behind. Her eyes lifted toward the black void beyond the shattered dome. Out there, drifting in formation like vultures, the Karai cruisers loomed with their pale green hulls glinting against the stars. They had fired on civilians. Not soldiers, not defenses, not fleets. Families, miners, teachers, children. The one law that every species had sworn to respect, the law that had kept the stars from burning themselves into silence, meant nothing to them. A body floated past her viewport, turning slowly, its face frozen in terror. Her throat tightened until she thought she would choke. Humanity had been weak once, hungry, divided, always begging for scraps at the edges of empires. But this was different. Her comm buzzed again. "Captain, Dock 3's filling. We need a seal in 2 minutes or the whole section's going to collapse." She closed her eyes. For just a second, she let the silence of space press in around her. Then she opened them, cold and steady. "Seal when you must," she said, "and record everything you see, every fire, every body, every voice that doesn't make it out. Send it across the colonies." "Captain, why?" "Because this isn't war anymore," she whispered. Her hand closed around the melted toy still floating at her side. "This is a crime, and they think we'll let it pass." She looked again at the alien ships glinting outside the dome, and for the first time since the blast, her fear hardened into something else. They're wrong. The funeral was rushed because there was no time for grief in open space. Bodies wrapped in thermal sheets slid silently through the launch bay doors, drawn into the black with nothing more than a whispered name and the faint hum of airlocks closing. The crew of the Resolute stood in ragged rows, their faces pale under harsh white lights. No prayers, no speeches, just the hiss of air and the knowledge that every minute spent saying goodbye was a minute stolen from survival. Lieutenant Pike did not look at the bodies drifting away. He stared at his boots instead, jaw clenched. When the last body left, he muttered, "We're burying more of ours than we're killing of theirs." Captain Keen heard him, but didn't answer. She stood in front of the crew, her spine straight though her ribs still ached from the station blast. She could feel the doubt in the room like static in the air. Every set of eyes was asking the same question. What now? Later, in the strategy bay, the silence finally broke. "We can't take them head on," said Commander Jansen, one of the few senior officers still alive. He slammed his hand against the holodeble. "Their ships outgun us 3-1, and that's being generous. We need to regroup, hide, send word to the council, and wait while the syndicate burns another station." Pike snapped. He leaned over the table, his voice rising. "You saw Vera. You saw the kids they pulled out charred. You're saying we sit still and trust politicians who couldn't stop this in the first place?" "Watch yourself, Lieutenant," Jansen growled. "No, let him speak," Keen cut in. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were sharp. "Because he's not wrong. The Karai thing will bow our heads and grieve quietly. They're counting on us to retreat." The holodeble flickered as Herrera, the xenolinguist, pulled up a feed she had cracked from the enemy databank scavenged before the blast. Alien glyphs scrolled down the display, her translations overlaying in broken English. "This is one of their convoy schedules," she explained. "Routine supply run, lightly guarded compared to the main fleet. Fuel, weapons, food for their forward bastions. If we hit it, we hurt them. Not a killing blow, but a message." Pike's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Now that I can work with." Jansen rubbed his forehead. "A message? Do you even hear yourselves? That convoy will still be better armed than anything we can field. We're talking about sending human lives into a grinder just so we can shout 'Look at us' before we're vaporized." Keen didn't flinch. "We don't have to destroy it all. We just have to show them we're not prey. Every strike buys us time. Every risk makes them bleed resources. That's how we survive." The room fell into silence. Even Jansen couldn't argue with the unspoken truth. They were already at war, whether they wanted it or not. When the briefing broke, Pike caught up to Keen in the corridor. His voice was lower now, rawer. "Captain, if we go for this convoy, people are going to die. Maybe all of us. But if we don't, we're just waiting our turn. Tell me straight, do you think we can actually win?" Laura stopped. For a long moment, she said nothing. The hum of the ship's engines filled the space between them. Finally, she answered, her voice heavy but clear. "I don't know if we can win, but I know this. If we do nothing, then they decide how humanity ends. If we fight, even with scraps and spit, then at least we decide how we live." Pike nodded once. Not in agreement, not really, but because he needed to hear someone say it. Hours later, the Resolute and 2 battered frigates slipped out of hiding, silent against the dark. They coasted through the shadow of a shattered moon, reactor signatures masked, hull plating patched with whatever scrap they could weld in time. Ahead, just as Herrera had predicted, the convoy came into view. 3 freighters, 2 escorts. Sleek, alien, confident in their dominance. Pike, strapped into the weapon's seat, muttered under his breath, "Let's see how confident you are when rocks start shooting at you." He keyed the thrusters. Chunks of asteroid tumbled across the convoy's path. At first, the Korai escorts adjusted casually, as though brushing off space debris. They didn't notice until too late that the debris was hiding humans. The first strike came from within the rocks, plasma fire lancing across the void and tearing into an escort's flank. The Karai formation twisted, comms flaring in confusion. The second escort wheeled to respond, only to find its sensors scrambled by a pulse of ancient, obsolete human tech, a trick too primitive for the Syndicate to expect. The ambush ignited. The Resolute roared out from the asteroid shadow, guns blazing. The convoy battle was supposed to be quick. Strike, steal, vanish. Instead, it dragged into a storm of fire that clawed at every nerve on the bridge of the Resolute. Shields down to 30. Pike shouted, fingers flying over his console. Sweat stung his eyes. One more hit, and we're eating vacuum. The ship shuddered violently as enemy fire grazed the hull. Metal screamed. Lights flickered. Captain Keen gripped the railing to stay upright, her voice cutting through the chaos. Target the freighter's reactor line. Forget the escorts. Cut the head off, and they'll scatter. Pike fired, his voice raw. Reactor line it is. A bolt of plasma slammed into the freighter's belly. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the ship cracked open like a metal egg. The blast consumed 2 of the convoy ships in a ripple of blue fire. The bridge erupted with cheers, half relief and half hysteria. Pike actually laughed, a ragged, disbelieving sound. We did it. We actually... Brace! Keen barked. The last escort retaliated with a searing volley. One of their frigates took the full hit, shields collapsing instantly. The blast chewed through its spine and sent bodies tumbling into the void. On the comms, screams cut short into static. The ship's name, Horizon's Wake, winked out from the tactical display. The cheering died. Keen's throat tightened. Another 100 gone just like that. The price of their defiance had been collected before the fire even faded. Captain, Herrera said softly, staring at the charred freighter remains. One of their databanks is still intact. If we can recover it, we might get something, codes, locations, maybe even fleet intel. It wasn't even a question anymore. They had to take every scrap they could. Hours later, Pike led the boarding team through the wreckage. The alien ship was a tomb, its corridors still glowing with embers. The air reeked of burnt alloys and whatever passed for Karai blood. Strange, almost crystalline splatters shimmered across the walls. The silence pressed in. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of things waiting to be found. Keep your eyes open, Pike muttered, his rifle steady but his voice tight. Feels wrong, one of the Marines said. Too easy. They should have scuttled this thing before we ever got near it. Yeah, Pike answered, though he didn't slow. They found the databank chamber 3 decks in. The core pulsed faintly, a cylinder of alien glass humming with unreadable glyphs. Herrera's voice crackled over comms. Don't touch anything until I say so. If it's booby-trapped, one wrong move, and it could fry your suits. Pike approached anyway, scanning the structure. Looks clean to me. Just sitting here like they want us to take it. He didn't mean it literally, but Herrera's sharp inhale over the comms told him she'd thought the same thing. Still, orders were orders. They secured the databank, dragged it back to the Resolute, and braced themselves for the next fight. In the strategy bay, Herrera translated the fragments while Keen and Jansen watched the screen flicker with alien characters. It's fleet coordination data, Herrera said finally, her tone cautious. Not full commands, but enough to suggest a pattern. Their forward bastion, here, she highlighted a star system, relies on supply routing through 3 main corridors. If we strike one, the others stagger. Hit the bastion itself, and they choke. Jansen's eyes widened. That's suicide. We barely survived 2 escorts, and you want us to attack their bastion? Pike slammed his fist on the table. Then what? Sit here until they torch another station? At least this gives us a shot. Keen stayed silent, staring at the glowing map. The bastion pulsed like a dare. She could feel every death behind her, pushing her forward. Finally she said, we hit it. Not to win outright, but to bleed them. To remind them that for every law they break, we'll take something back. Jansen opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The room already felt decided. The strike launched 3 days later. The fleet, if you could call 3 ships a fleet, slipped through hidden jump corridors toward the bastion. Every crewman knew the odds, but no one spoke them aloud. On the bridge, Keen felt the weight of it pressing against her ribs harder than the bruises ever had. Pike led the boarding team again, this time with grim determination instead of bravado. His closest friend, a gunner named Harris, clapped him on the shoulder before they launched. Pike tried to grin, but the smile never reached his eyes. When they breached the bastion, the trap snapped shut. Alien ships emerged from the dark, not scrambled, not panicked. Perfectly positioned, as if they'd been waiting all along. On the Resolute's bridge, Keen's blood ran cold. They knew, she whispered. The comms erupted with desperate shouts as the ambush closed. One of their frigates was gutted instantly. Boarding pods came under fire before they even latched. Pike's voice crackled through static. We're pinned. Harris is down. They knew we were coming. Keen's heart twisted. She had led them straight into it. Outside, the Bastion's guns lit the void, carving humanity's defiance into broken hulls and drifting bodies. Hours later, what remained of the Resolute limped into shadow, battered and bleeding. Of the boarding teams, barely half returned. Pike dragged himself back aboard, Harris gone, his own armor scorched through at the shoulder. His eyes were empty when he met Keen's. "We walked right into it," he said. "No anger, no blame. Just exhaustion. They were waiting for us." Keen couldn't answer. She just looked at him, then down at the deck, where the names of the dead were already being etched into her memory. Humanity had struck, and the Karai had answered. Every victory they clawed out came at the cost of blood they could not spare. And yet, even in that silence, even in that crushing defeat, the thought lingered. They had survived the trap. Somehow they were still alive. And that in itself was a message. The hangar smelled of scorched metal and despair. Welding sparks showered down as crew members patched torn plating with whatever scrap they could pull from the wreckage. The Resolute barely looked like a warship anymore. Its hull was a patchwork quilt of scars. Its engines groaned with every test cycle, and half its weapons were still offline. Pike sat on an overturned crate, helmet off, hands black with soot. He hadn't spoken much since Harris's death. Most of the crew gave him space. They had all lost someone, but Pike carried it differently, tight, brittle, like the first crack in glass before the whole pane shatters. Captain Keen found him there. She didn't approach right away, just stood with her hands behind her back, watching the crew drag cables across the floor. Finally, she said, "You're not the only one who wishes we died with them." He glanced up sharply. "That's supposed to help?" "No," she admitted. She stepped closer. "It's supposed to remind you that wishing for death is easy. Living with it is harder." He let out a humorless laugh. "Hell, the pep talk, Captain." Before she could answer, Herrera's voice cut across the intercom. "Command deck. Now, I think I've found something." The three of them stood around the holodeck again, the scars of their last mission still etched into their faces. Herrera tapped the console, and a vast, skeletal structure appeared in rotating blue light. "This is what I pulled from the fragments of their databank. The Karai call it a Pulse Arkansas. Think of it as a relay on steroids. It coordinates their fleets across faster-than-light corridors, syncing movements in ways we can't even replicate." Jansen frowned. "And you're saying if we destroy it, their fleets fracture," Herrera said. "Not destroyed, not crippled, but disorganized. Every attack takes longer to launch. Every reinforcement arrives late. For a war machine that relies on precision, that could hurt them more than any single battle." Keen studied the projection. The arc spun slowly, alien symbols scrolling across it like veins. It looked less like a machine and more like some vast organ floating in space. Her gut twisted. "What's guarding it?" she asked. Herrera hesitated. "Everything." Silence fell. Pike finally broke it. "So we can't win." Keen's voice was quiet but steady. "No, but we can make sure they remember us." The crew gathered in the mess hall, crammed shoulder to shoulder, the air heavy with the smell of recycled food and grease. Keen stood at the front, not with the commander's distance, but among them. She looked into their tired, hollow faces and spoke plainly. "You know what the Karai think of us? Weak, fragile, predictable. They thought breaking the law would break us. Instead, it woke something they should have left sleeping. We're going after their Pulse Arkansas, not because we expect to live through it, not because we think one ship can take down an empire, but because if we succeed, they will know humanity will never crawl quietly into the grave they dug for us." No cheers followed, just silence. Then one voice from the back. "So we hit them, and we make it count." Another voice added, "For Vera." A third, "For the wake." By the end, the mess hall was humming. Not joy, not hope, but a hard, bitter determination. The assault began in the shadows of a dead star. The Resolute and its two surviving escorts coasted dark, power signatures masked. Ahead, the Pulse Arc loomed, a vast lattice of alien architecture, its surface pulsing with eerie green light. Dozens of Karai ships swarmed around it like bees around a hive. Pike muttered into his mic, voice tight. Looks like suicide from here, too. Keen replied without humor. Good. That means we're being honest. The first move was misdirection. The escorts slingshot chunks of broken asteroids toward the Ark, drawing enemy ships into pursuit. As the Karai scattered, the Resolute slipped closer, right in the blind spot between sensor arcs. Then they struck. The Resolute's guns blazed, tearing through the Ark's outer shielding. Pike worked the weapons like a man possessed, his every shot fueled by rage and loss. Enemy fire poured back, shaking the ship violently. Panels burst, sparks rained down, crewmen screamed. Shields failing, someone shouted. Keen kept her voice calm. Hold them. Just a little longer. On a side channel, Herrera's voice wavered. Captain, I can broadcast false fleet signals, mimic their own command codes. It'll only confuse them for minutes, maybe seconds, but do it. The comms filled with panicked alien chatter as the pulse arc briefly turned against itself, feeding its fleet contradictory orders. Some ships froze. Others collided. Gaps opened. This is it. Keen roared. All batteries on the Ark's core. Pike's hands flew. Plasma lances tore through the lattice, ripping open chambers that vented strange green light into the void. The Ark shuddered, its glow faltering. But the cost came crashing in. One escort disintegrated under enemy fire, the explosion lighting the Ark like a funeral pyre. The other was crippled, spinning helplessly into the dark. On the Resolute, alarms screamed. Fires spread across decks. Crew were blown into vacuum as sections of the hull collapsed. Keen's ribs screamed with every breath, but she refused to leave the command chair. Drive it home, she shouted. The Resolute plunged forward, guns firing until the barrels glowed white-hot. Pike's console exploded, shrapnel cutting into his face, but he kept firing. Herrera screamed into the comms, her voice shaking as she forced alien code into the Ark's systems, destabilizing its core. Then the Ark cracked. A chain of explosions tore through its spine, cascading outward until the entire structure blossomed in a storm of fire and twisted metal. The shockwave hurled the Resolute spinning, flames licking across its hull. For a long moment, the battlefield fell silent. The Ark was gone. The surviving crew dragged themselves from the wreckage. Pike's uniform was scorched, blood running down his cheek, but his eyes were alive for the first time in weeks. We did it, he rasped, barely able to believe the words. Keen stood in the ruined bridge, watching the last fragments of the Ark scatter across the stars. Her voice was low, almost lost in the static. Yes, she said, but look at what's left of us. On their displays, dozens of Karai ships still burn bright. The Empire was wounded, but not defeated. The silence that followed was not victory. It was the heavy breath between battles, the weight of knowing the fight had only begun. The Resolute drifted, half dead, wrapped in smoke and silence. Fires still smoldered in gutted corridors. Whole decks were gone, torn open to the void. The few who remained moved like ghosts, patching leaks with scraps of plating, dragging the wounded to whatever corners still held life support. Pike limped through the wreckage of the weapons deck, his face streaked with blood and ash. He paused at Harris's station, staring at the empty chair. The console was blackened, shattered by fire, but he still laid a hand on it, as if expecting her voice to return. For the first time since her death, his chest didn't feel hollow. It felt burning, alive with something heavier than grief. In the shattered bridge, Keen sat slumped in her chair. She had refused medical aid until every last survivor was seen to. Herrera stood beside her, leaning heavily on a crutch, one eye swollen shut. Together they looked out through the cracked viewport, where the Pulse Ark's wreckage still glimmered in the distance. Herrera's voice was hoarse. We actually did it. We broke their spine. Keen shook her head. We gave them a scar. Scars don't kill. They remind the enemy why they want you gone. Static crackled across the comms. A broken, patchy signal cut through other human voices. Scattered fleets, pirate bands, even civilian freighters that had heard the impossible rumor. One ship had taken the fight to the Karai and lived. Keen listened as the voices layered, hesitant at first, then stronger. Not organized, not a fleet, just fragments of humanity whispering to each other in the dark. Pike entered the bridge, leaning against the doorway, his uniform torn to ribbons. They're not whispers, Captain. They're waiting for someone to say it out loud. Keen finally stood, her ribs screaming in protest. She pressed the comms open to every frequency she could reach. Her voice was steady, carrying across the silence of space. "This is Captain Eleanor Keen of the Resolute. We are bloodied but alive. The Karai are not invincible. They bleed, just as we do. If they come for humanity, they will find us ready, with fire in our hands. We will not vanish quietly. We will not go alone." Her words hung in the void. Then, slowly, one ship answered. Then another, and another. Not cheers, not triumph, but the sound of survival becoming defiance. Herrera closed her eyes, tears sliding down her bruised face. Pike stared out at the stars, the weight of grief and rage still heavy, but tempered now into something harder, something sharper. The crew of the Resolute stood in silence, each of them knowing the truth. The war had only begun. Far beyond the wreckage, in the shadows of distant stars, new Karai fleets were already forming, faster and stronger. The Empire would come, angrier than ever, with vengeance in its heart. But for the first time, humanity was not just running. They were waiting, and somewhere in that silence, the fire of defiance caught, spreading ember to ember, ready to ignite the galaxy.